Can you master a complete song using just your iPad? Well, thanks to the Final Touch app here in iOS, you can. And in this series of videos, I'm going to show you how. So let's go. Hi, my name is Pete, and this is Studio Live Today, where I help you create, record, and release your best music. And if you are going to release a song, you may want to consider mastering it. But what is mastering? Well, what mastering does is it takes your final mix and adds some EQ, some limiting, some compression, and a few other final tweaks to make sure that it is radio ready and that your song will compete with other songs when it's released to your Spotify, your Apple Music, your iTunes, and all the rest. So in this series of videos, I'm going to show you step by step how we can take a song, put it into Final Touch here on the iPad, and complete the mastering process using some of the amazing modules and effects that we have here in Final Touch. So let's jump in and get started. In this, the first video in our Final Touch mastering series, we're going to take a look at the interface here in Final Touch and give you a crash course in how everything works so that you can get in and start playing with your masters. And then in future episodes, we're going to talk about all of the different topics, including importing and exporting your files and using all of the different 6 modules that we have here as part of Final Touch. So let's jump in now and take a look at the interface here in Final Touch. The interface here in a Final Touch may look a little bit daunting, but it's actually a very effective layout. So the first thing that you're going to want to look at is how to import a song into Final Touch. And we do that by tapping in the top left corner on the little note icon here, and we can import from iTunes, Dropbox, FTP, file sharing, audio paste, and audio share. And we'll be covering exactly how to use those import options in a future video. We can also output by tapping on the output button to the right, and in between here is our information all about our track. So we can see the track name, we can see the kilohertz there, the sample rate, the bit rate, and the size of the file. Moving to the right from there, we have our transport controls. So we can tap anywhere in our waveform, and then we can tap the back button to go to the start. We can hit play to play our track at any point. But my heart. And we can press stop or pause to pause the playback. We can undo our last move and redo using our undo and redo functions. And then over on the right-hand side here, we have our settings. So we can change all of the global settings that we have here in Final Touch. Moving down the right side now, we have our master input fader and our master output fader. So we can adjust those by sliding them up and down, and we can bring them back to 0 by double tapping them. We can also link or unlink them by tapping on these yellow buttons, meaning we can change the left and the right signals independently. If we relink those, they will come back and be linked together again. Moving down here, we have our positive grid on and off button. So this will turn on all processing and turn off all processing. We can also use our presets. If we tap on the preset button here, we can actually use these global presets, and these will actually change all 6 modules here. So they will incorporate presets across all 6 of the different effects modules that we have. So we can use our presets to predetermine our sound there. Along the bottom of the screen here are our 6 modules. So from left to right, we have the pre-EQ, the reverb, the dynamics, which is a multi-band compressor, our stereo imager, our post EQ, which is a second parametric EQ, and then our maximizer, which is our brick wall limiter that does our limiting at the end of our signal chain. These work by dragging down to bring them into the signal chain or dragging up to take them out. And anything that's in that orange line will be in the signal chain and will be processed. We can also change the order of our effects by tapping and dragging them and moving them to a different location along our chain. Let's take a look at the center part of our display here. And what you'll notice is that as we change through all of the 6 different modules, we get a different layout and different information displayed. And this is because this information is related to that particular effects module, and it will be different with the different module selected. So here's our EQ, and you'll notice that we can use our XY here to adjust the frequency and adjust the amount of boost or cut of our EQ. We have some different controls here, which we will cover in detail detail in our EQ episode. And then we have our output out here. And this is an important thing to understand because as we make changes in each of these modules, we may need to adjust the output volume to make sure that we are not clipping our signal. And we have metering here to show us if we're clipping or not. Let's continue on and have a look at the reverb. Now this is a similar sort of layout here, but we have different options here. And instead of having an output meter, we have a dry and a wet to show how much of the dry and how much of the processed affected signal that we want to go into our final mix. If we jump down to dynamics, now we have an input as well as an output control on the left and right here. And then we have our frequency XY pad in the middle here, but down the bottom we have our compressor control. So we can adjust the attack, threshold, release, ratio, and gain of our compressor here. And then once again, we can make sure that our output is not clipping our signal once we have added that compression. And again, we'll show you all about how to use a multi-band compressor on your master in our dynamics episode. Our stereo imager here again has a different type of display here because we're now looking at the width or the stereo image of our track. So we can adjust the different settings here. And again, we'll show you all about that in our stereo imager video. But we do have the output control again, which if we do make some adjustments, we can adjust that to once again, make sure we're not clipping our signal. Our post-EQ display is exactly the same as our pre-EQ, and you may be asking, why do we have two different EQs? Well, the reason for this is you might want to make some EQ adjustments to some frequencies, and then after you've added your reverb, dynamics, and stereo imaging, you may find that you want to boost or cut some new frequencies before you go in to your maximizer and do your limiting. So we have a second round of EQ here with all the same functions of the pre-EQ. And finally, we have our maximizer, which is our brick wall limiter here in Final Touch. And this time we have an input gain over here on the left. We have a threshold control, which tells the limiter at what point it should start applying that limiting. We have a ceiling to define the upper limit that we want our volume to go to. We can adjust the release of the limiter, which will tell it how long it needs to hold that limiting before it actually releases it again. And then we have our dithering selections over here on the right-hand side. So this, again, will all be explained when we go through the maximizer episode, and we'll talk about all of these functions in a lot more detail. A couple of quick tips when using our sliders here. So you'll notice here that we can move up and down, and if we go to a position here and we want to go back to 0, we can double tap on that slider and it will go back to 0 dB. We also mentioned link before, so if we tap on the little yellow light here for link, we can now independently move our sliders for the left and right channel in stereo mode, or the mid and the side in our mid-side mode. And we'll talk about mid-side mode in just a minute and in a lot more detail in a future episode. If we want to link these again, we tap link, and now we can move them back again in tandem and they will stay linked together. So one of the coolest functions we have here in Final Touch is the ability to switch between stereo and mid-side mode on a lot of our modules here. So let's explain that here by showing the pre-EQ. Just above our output meter here is a slider which says stereo and mid-side. If we tap on that, it is going to switch over to mid-side mode. Now, what is the difference here? Let's go back to stereo. Now, you'll notice here that with stereo, our output has left and right. So we can adjust here separately the left and the right. And what we can actually do here is, instead of having it linked, if we look to the left of there, we've got these buttons here where we can independently adjust the right side and the left side. So we can have different EQ curves for the left, and then tap this one and have a different EQ curve for the right. So we can actually adjust that between the stereo fields, and then go back to link if we want those to actually be the same. The B and the S buttons are merely to bypass and to solo, so that we can actually bypass and solo the left or the right, so we can just hear them in isolation when we're doing our EQ or our compression moves. Now, what about mid-side mode? Let's slide back over to here. Now what we can control is the center channel, so things that are going up the middle of our mix, which is our mid. So we can change the way our middle goes, and this is usually where things like your bass and your kick drum are going to sit. And then we have our side mode. So this is the sides, the left and the right channels, the extremities of our mix. So this is a very cool way to do your mastering in mid-side mode. So if you're wondering about the lights across the top there and what the difference between stereo and mid-side mode is, now you know. Let's look now to the left of our mid-side options here, and you'll notice here where it says Untitled, we can tap on this and we can actually set a preset, but this time instead of a preset for the entire track like we have down in the bottom right, we can set a preset for each individual module, and as we select every different module, we have a different set of presets that we can actually add. We can also save and edit those presets, so we can predefine our own custom presets and then recall them by using the preset option here. To the left of that, we have a little power button here, which is actually going to enable, if we look at the bottom as we turn on and off, that puts the particular module in our effects chain. So if we tap that, it does the same thing as dragging our effect in and out of the signal chain. Let's quickly recap on all of the things that we've covered in this video. So we have our import and our export options up here at the top of our display. Then we also have our transport controls and our waveform view where we can touch to go to different parts. We have our undo and our redo, and then we have our settings in the top right corner. As we go down the right, we have our input and our output meter so that we can set those to make sure that our signal is at the right level and not clipping. In the bottom right, we have our power switch where we can turn off and turn on all of our processing, and we have our global presets that we can add. Along the bottom, we have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different modules, and we'll be covering each of these in a heap more detail in the future episodes. We can add them and remove them by sliding them in and out of our effects chain. In the center here, we have a different custom layout and custom options depending on which module we've selected, including input, output, and heaps of other options that we'll be covering in more detail. We can also select our stereo or our mid-side processing, and we can even select which one we want to work on and solo or bypass to make sure that we can hear exactly what we're changing on that. We can tap on our individual presets for each module and select those, as well as save our own custom presets, and we can use our power switch to turn on and off each module so we can review them as we're using them and as we're going along. And there you go. I hope this video gave you a good overview of the Final Touch mastering app here on the iPad. In the next episode, we'll be taking a look at the importing options in a lot more detail and how you can get your song into Final Touch. So check the links down below for even more here on Studio Live Today.